Hello, this is JungleJargon again. I'm making this video directed towards scientists who seem to think that life forms have been around for millions and millions of years. The evidence doesn't support that. Geological evidence doesn't support that. Historical evidence doesn't support that. We have records from all around the world saying there was a global flood event. We have geological evidence showing sediments stacked in layers over a mile deep, which could not get there any other way other than a global flood event. We have fossils in those layers that were buried by the global flood event. And what do scientists have to say for themselves? They base their belief entirely on things that don't happen. They base their belief entirely on the assumption that mutations organize the genome in a specific direction and natural selection points the way or something. Well, it doesn't happen. Mutations don't organize anything. Natural selection can only select what genome reorganizes. The genome has to protect its information from mutations and any external effects, and it does a good job at that, which also excludes evolution from happening. Okay, this is the geological evidence that we have. It's like the sands in an hourglass that you turn upside down. If you notice, sedimentary deposits are on land. There are no sedimentary deposits to speak of in the ocean. Some will say that it's because they were subducted. Yeah, that's partially true. But the other fact is that there's no possible way to get the sediments on land unless you have a global flood. They're over a mile deep. They're consecutive. They're micro thin. They're one on top of the other. There's no erosion in between, or in most cases, or in many cases, which totally excludes the sediments coming there any other way, because the entire continents, entire mountain chains consist of the deposit sediments. So geology has failed to explain the origin of sediments, where it came from, and how the sediments came to cover everything that was living on Earth. They have totally failed us. That's because they're trying to tell us another story. They're trying to tell us a story about millions and millions of years. The sediment came from who knows where and stacked on top of a very smooth plain, who knows why, and it happened hundreds of times in succession, which is not the case. And they say there's hundreds of millions of years missing in those layers. What kind of science is that? How can you have history missing from consecutive layers? How can you have history missing from consecutive layers deposited one on top of the other? The people are jokers. And you insist on teaching nonsense to children. You insist on telling the public that doesn't know hardly anything that they're the product of millions and billions of years of who knows what and who knows why. when it's clear that's not the case. It's clear that we have a beginning. History has a beginning. Our geology that we have today, according to every record around the world, is no older than 5,100 years old. That includes historical records and calendars from the Mayans, the Hindus, the Egyptians, the Chinese. Nothing is older. Nothing is any older than 5,100 years. And the only thing that is the biblical record, which has the record, events, names, places, going back to Adam and Eve. Everyone living is related to one of three people. They're either Japhethites, Hamites, or Shemites. Shemites, otherwise known as Semites, are Jews, Arabs, and other people groups. The Hamites are the largest number of variety of people, are the Africans. The Japhethites include the European, the Mongolian, and the Asians, which also happen to have mitochondrial DNA from Neanderthal, which proves we're not out of Africa. And they already found someone older buried in the Middle East that's not out of Africa either. It's older than anything found in Africa. So scientists don't know what they're trying to tell us. They don't know why they're saying what they're saying, and it always turns out to be false anyway. So creationists get the last laugh, we get the smile on their face, and they end up scratching their head, wondering what's going on again. The one thing that you got to understand is that we have a maker. The only way that we can have directed functions, working parts, and mechanisms inside of us as we do is if we have a maker. You have to understand that we have a maker before you understand anything else. The maker is the one that stretched out the universe with function when it's ordered, only when it's ordered. There is no function, there is no order unless it's being ordered, unless it's been ordered. That's science. That's the facts. No, we did not exist millions of years ago because all the sediments would have eroded into the ocean by now. Remember the hourglass? The hourglass of the sediments in geology date the catastrophic event called the flood. It wasn't long ago, and it lines up with history, the historical accounts that we have. So I'm tired of hearing this nonsense of such and such an animal lived millions and millions of years ago. That's not true. They were all buried in the flood 5,100 years ago, maximum. They're all buried in the same layers of sediment, stacked one on top of the other. They're consecutive layers. The only possible way is if it was one major global event that deposited the sediments. The only reason why we're living on top of the sediments is because our ancestors were in the ark, and all the animals were in the ark that are on the earth today. Everything else is buried in the flood, buried in those sediments. Teach that to the children, because that's history, that's the facts. You totally fail to explain the origin of the sediments, how they got there, how they came to cover everything living on Earth. It's just so annoying. If you've got something to teach, you have to base it on something. You have to base it on some kind of fact. And the fact is that we can't exist with any of our functions without having a maker. That's a fact. That's a fact you can't deny. Now, the scientists don't know anything if they don't know we have a maker. It doesn't matter what they discover. All they're doing is learning that the universe is a fabrication that has function. But the fabrication is all relative. Nothing in the fabrication is constant. It's all subject to change. And the only way we know we have a maker is because the fabrication has function when it's ordered. That's the only reason we know there's a maker. And of course you should have known that. If you see an animal, you see a bird, you see a tree, you should have known there was a maker. Because the thing can't make itself. It doesn't arise itself. It's never been proven to rise from itself. And if anything ever started, it can never continue. But it doesn't start. It doesn't ever start because it's like TV snow. TV snow will never produce an image. And if it ever produces an image, which it never will, it'll never produce a moving image. What is wrong with you people? What is wrong with you? How can you attribute to objects and forces your existence? When objects and forces have no direction, they have no direction, they have no clue, they have no nothing. How can you do that? You have a maker. Admit it. Acknowledge it.